Hey, good evening, everyone. It's a little bit of an informal night Seder learning, but we will record it just for those who someone asked to be recording. There's a new night Seder initiative. I'm pretty sure it's a bunch of different options, but every Thursday night we'll be learning a different tshuva. And I picked the tshuva this week specifically because there was a little bit of a confusion when Rav Hershel Shechter came on Shabbos a few weeks ago about his comments about drinking milk or having any dairy products. So I picked a tshuva. Actually, it doesn't say on the top what the sefer is. It's actually Minchas Asher, Chelek Rishon, Simin Lamed Tes, Rav Asher Weiss. Actually, you could see at the bottom. Actually, at the bottom, you could see on the Otzar Chachma website. So we'll take apart his tshuva, but I think I just have to provide a little bit of background so that you know a little bit about what we're talking about. So, first of all, this whole issue of dairy products came to the surface about 20 years ago. I would estimate. There's an RJJ Journal article from Rabbi Michael Zilberman in 2007. And I used that article, and there's a number of other articles for some background information. And a number of people raised this issue. A number of issues were raised, but one of the main issues that we're going to try to deal with today was raised by a number of different people. Rav Belsky deals with it. Rav Dov Weiss, who is Rav Asher Weiss's brother. There's some letters Rav Shechter's written about it. And the issue is not, just to be clear, we're not dealing with a Chol of Yisrael question here. We're not dealing with whether or not we have to have a mashgiach or some knowledgeable, however we understand it, yediyah, re'iyah, whatever we're going to call it, about knowing that we have Chol of Yisrael. It's not what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with a different concern. And that concern has to do with animals being called, something called a treifa. What is a treifa? So that's a good question. Parlance and colloquial usage, people call, this is treif, this is kosher. That's not really what the word means. It really means torn. And we have certain, really yudches, 18 different signs that Chazal established to be signs of treifa. And what it's trying to determine whether the animal is going to be a viable, whether it will live out the year. Now, whether it's going to live out the year is really somewhat secondary, because really we'll see that the halacha is that we really don't check every single limb, every single body of every single animal. There are certain things we have a Masorah to check. We'll see that the Shulchan Aruch has writes that we just check the lungs. That's in Simin Sama Yordia Simin Lamed Tes Sif Aleph. And even there, if it's not possible to check the lungs, the Ramah says we have a practice not to, and we could be lenient, but it's better to if we can. That's really where the term, by the way, glat kosher comes from. Glat means smooth in Yiddish. So if you want to know what the word, it really means that the lungs are smooth. Because we'll see that one of the issues that we have to figure out is there are these abrasions, sirchos in Hebrew, that sometimes are found on the lungs, and that could be a sign of, again, halachic treifa. Whether it's going to live or not, we won't know, because generally when you're checking the animal, it's already dead. So you're not necessarily going to know. So that's the we basically deal with checking, where we check to see if there's any abrasions in the lungs to know whether there is an issue of treifa. So that's some background information. If an animal has significant abrasions that we would consider to be taraf or treif, then we would not be allowed to eat it. So that's all with regard to the meat of the animal. What about the milk? So there is a principle, it comes from the Gemara in Bechoros, and the Shulchan Aruch paskins this as well. There's a principle called hayotze min hatame tame and hayotze min hatar tar. It's not in your source sheet. Just giving you background information. If you have an animal that is a camel, and you milk a camel, so just like the camel itself is treif, you can't eat the camel's meat, you can't drink the camel's milk. So if you have an animal which is treif, if you wouldn't be allowed to eat the meat of the animal, then hayotze mi hatame tame. I'm just summarizing a lot of discussion about this, but basically you're not allowed to drink the milk of a treif animal. Not treif, the species, as I mentioned, the word treif is just colloquially used, but the animal is a taraf. The animal has a torn part of its body, one of the yudchas simanim that we would consider to be treif, which is generally in our Bizman Hazeh, we're just going to deal with the lungs, and that's going to be called treif milk. So if anyone ever tells you this is glatt kosher pizza, you know there's something a little bit off with that, because there's no, unless you are very lumdish, and it's glatt kosher cows that we checked before that now we milk them, so now it's kosher. But generally speaking, nobody uses that terminology. This. So I was a little bit prepared. I thought someone would ask this question. I'm not going to really deal with the shiloh, which is it is related. It's a very related shiloh. I'm not really going to deal with it, but there's something called the. Let me just find the exact terminology here. Displaced abomasum cows, which is, not to get too graphic on you, but basically cows have a lot of gas buildup, and it causes a lot of pain, and they started in the dairy farms to basically puncture their stomachs and move around some of the bloat and try to prevent the bloat from happening, and that was a red flag for a lot of the kashrus organizations, because they were saying, well, you're puncturing the animals' stomachs and then you're repairing it, but maybe this would cause it to be a treifa. We're going to just assume for now that that's not an issue. There are people have researched this and have found that the displaced abomasums are not, for whatever reason, we're not getting into it, are not really generally a problem. But we're going to raise a different problem, which is that generally speaking, dairy cows are progressively being younger and younger. Basically, the way that milk is produced in the U.S., I'm not sure exactly how it's produced in Canada, but in the U.S., based on these articles, I've gleaned that they only milk them for about 3 years, max, maybe 4 or 5 max, and then they're slaughtering them, but they're not going to be slaughtering them as kosher cows. They're just going to be slaughtering them for pastrami or for other kinds of lower grade meat, and the high production and the manufacturing, so to speak, of the dairy is such that the animals, for what is reported, again, this is all anecdotal because you'll never really know, because the animals are not being shechted as kosher cows. So, but they're reporting that there was a lot of sirchos, a lot of these abrasions in the lungs. So, the question is, at what percentage? And if we were to do a general study of a statistical study, we have someone here who does a lot of statistical studies and analysis. So if we were to do a statistical analysis of non-kosher cows in the dairy market, this is from an article in 2007 published in the RJJ Journal. He writes that in one rabbi involved in the kashrus supervision of Johannesburg, South Africa, reported 95% of dairy cows slaughtered contain adhesions on the lungs. 95%. And then another rabbi, this is coming from a letter from Herschel Schechter, who observed that one dairy farm, 80% of slaughtered cows had adhesions. So while these two accounts do not necessarily reflect a representative sample, but the question would be, how in halacha can we establish a majority of dairy cows are not treif? How can we establish that? Because at first glance, if we don't have a majority of cows being considered to be not treif, then we'd have a major problem, because you'd have a majority of treif cows, and then hayotze mehatame tame, and you wouldn't be able to consume any dairy.
So you only a majority of the 4-year-old cows.
Right. So this is another question. When are you checking?
That the adhesion only occurred right now. So then you're at way less than that.
So there's another question of when did the adhesions come about, and how do we know? It's another problem, but let's just assume we're going to use the most worst case scenario and generalize based on that we have, at least statistically, Rav Shechter is saying there's a major issue that we have a question, let's say a suffix rove. We don't know if we have rove animals being kosher, so that's a problem. Now, another issue, just so that you understand why this is becoming much more problematic, is that in prior times, in other generations, they would milk a cow, and they would take the milk from that cow. But now, the way that the dairy farms are produced, at least in the U.S., is they take all of the milk from they milk each of these 3 cows. They then put it all together in a big vat, mix it together with all the hundreds of other cows, thousands, hundreds of I don't even know how they do, pasteurize it and mix it all together. And when you drink a cup of milk in your cup, you could have hundreds of different cows' milks in your cup. So how do we know that we have a kosher cup of milk? So that's by way of introduction. There's probably more to discuss, but I see that the hour is getting late, and we need to start the tshuva before we have a guest speaker of Shia Fur at 8:30. Okay, no problem. Go learn. Okay, absolutely. Thanks to join us.
What's the percentage that actually have the kosher letters?
Of dairy cows or of regular cows? So, I mean, I don't know what the actual numbers are. I don't know what. So they're extrapolating from the non-kosher dairy cows, but you'll never. The slaughterhouses, right? Yes, the slaughterhouses are not. The kosher butcher houses are not using dairy cows. So we don't know. Maybe maybe something's going on with the dairy cows. We just don't know. There's a major, we'll call it a reisa. In halacha, it's a reisa. It's a major weakness in the rove. It's a red flag. We can't say for sure we know because we're only checking after the fact, and we're not even checking the dairy cows till we're never checking the dairy cows really, because the dairy cows are only milked for 3 years, and then they're given to non-kosher slaughterhouses, or they're not even given to slaughterhouses. So it's a whole different ballgame today. So let's take a look at this tshuva. This is and just spoiler alert, Rav Shechter is of the opinion, he said this publicly, he's written about it, he says that the OU has to do a study. And when we pushed him and said, is Rabbi saying you shouldn't be drinking milk or eating any dairy products until they do a study? He said, no, you shouldn't be. And his wife said, well, I follow the other rabbis, right? So that was the whole issue. So what are the other opinions? If most, Rav Shechter is saying there's a major problem, the OU has to go and do the studies, and other than that, he's really concerned about it. He asked a lot of Gedolim, he had a lot of stories, a lot of very entertaining stories, Gedolim avoiding him and avoiding the questions, but basically he believes, and he doesn't say this is necessarily a chiyuv, he doesn't say it as a psak, but he very much thinks it's a major problem to consume any dairy products today. So what is the other opinion? Is there room for leniency, and what is basically majority of poskim besides Rav Shechter? And I don't have to say he is certainly fit to have his own opinion. But what are everyone else saying? So there are a number of other poskim. I'll tell you out just anecdotally. I didn't look this up, but in a number of articles they quote from Rav Zalman Nechemi Goldberg, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach's son-in-law, Rav Yisrael Belsky, who Rav Shechter himself quoted as being lenient, although Rav Shechter claims he doesn't understand his position. You'll understand when we learn this tshuva why Rav Shechter says, I don't understand their position. Because it goes to the core of how you learn halacha. And it also has to do with Rav Shechter's shita on a lot of different things. So Rav Belsky, Rav Asher Weiss, and Rav Zalman Nechemi Goldberg, I would say, are the 3 major names. There's also Rav Yitzchak Halevi Halpern. But Rav Asher Weiss is the tshuva that I found is clear. It's written, it's recorded, and it is on the record as being lenient. And here's why. So let's take a look at the tshuva inside Siman Lamites. That which, in my opinion, you're asking my opinion as to with the kashrus, this recent concern about the kashrus of milk. And the foundation of this question is that there is a significant, recognizable percentage, shal behemos shein treifos, that the animals are treifa, they're, again, not going to live out the year, or they're chazal or halachically, we would consider it to be treif. L'fachot safek treifos. It's at least questionable. V'imkein mistamer davta zlidan basarov. Therefore, it is logical that even though we go based on majority, umutur lishtos esachalba, and you should be able to drink its milk, ulechol as bisara, and eat its meat, shall call behema ubehema, each and every animal. If you were to ask me, can I eat this behema? We have an assumption. Yes, because rov behemos are not treif. Shimina rova kashrus. Avol kasher me'arvim es hacholov shel meos paros. But now that they're mixing together, the way that it's produced is they're mixing together all these different milks. How can we say that all of these animals are all kosher? By the way, we generally would have to have a shishim. We'd have to have 60 times the kosher to non-kosher, which is in percentages 1.67%. So if you have anything less than that, you have generally a problem, which is generally assumed. I'm summarizing, months of learning, but basically the taste of the assumption of halachic taste is 1 in 60. So even though we're dealing with milk which all taste the same, but we assume you have to have at least 1/60th. So if you assume that at least you have whatever 10%, 20% are treif, so you don't have the 60 times. You don't have a percentage lower than 1.67%. Negera mitzias sheyesh esrim achuz treifos. You're going against the mitzias. You're going against the actual facts on the ground. Even though you're going to say, this animal's kosher, I look at each animal individually, but you're going against the facts on the ground when you say that you're still going to have shishim, because if you did a statistical analysis, you're for sure, or I can't say for sure, you very likely have more than 1.67% animals that have these problematic abrasions on their lungs that would not live the year. Since you know there's facts that you have, the chances are you have treifos there, so you need shishim. Based on, again, every country and every situation is going to have different numbers, but basically, if you did a representative study, you're going to have more than 1.67%. Almost certainly, because he says it's at least 20%. That's what he says here. It's at least 20% treifos. Then king call hataruves asura. So then all of the mixture and all the vats and all the pasteurized, homogenized, all that stuff is all treif. You can't eat it. You can't drink it. You can't consume it. So look at Rav Asher Weiss right out the gate is like, no. Lenias daiti. Call hamahuma. In my humble opinion, this whole confusion, betos yisoda, this is all in a fundamental error. Yisod hatos, b'mashe achlifu, bein din Torah, ta'ache rab mahatos, l'madoi ha-sistatika. I think I got that right. No, it doesn't say cis, it's statistic. Either way, statistics. You have replaced halacha with Achari Rabbi Mahatos, which is the source for rov in the Gemara. You have replaced the rules of halacha for statistics, for the modern, scientific methodology of statistics. Even though if you use the logical methodology of statistics, you cannot say it's 100% all kosher. You have to assume that at least whatever the percentage is going to be, it will be. He's using the idea of basically representative statistics. If I could say that general society has a certain statistic, so we could say that assuming that this not flock, herd will be representative of the general statistic. So, ach lo kim b'din Torah. This is not the way that we decide halacha. That's not what we mean when we say majority. Well, if you use the Torah laws, daininan bechol behema din kshera. We look at every single behema individually. Even if you mix together all that milk, if you mix it all together, kulan kesheros din Torah. The Torah will say it is all kosher. So he didn't prove it. He's coming out the gate telling you this is my position, and then he's going to prove it. So just in case anyone had any question, you're okay. You could drink your milk. Maybe don't tell Rav Shechter, but you could drink your milk and you could eat the dairy because Rav Asher Weiss is saying you don't understand halacha. With all due respect, Rav Shechter, statistics and rov are not the same. Now he's going to prove it, but yeah, it looks like we have some questions. Yeah. Which position? He didn't defend his position yet. He just said, whose position? Rav Asher Weiss? Yeah, okay, so we'll get there. We'll get there. Yeah.
If you have three pieces of meat, two of them
Chad betray butter.
right? And then what happens is, how do you look at that? So you can talk about it, but basically, right? If it's bottle, right? You need all three now.
Yeah, but that's
Old halacha. So that's
Whatever. We're gonna quote some halachos that you may be familiar with, some that you may not. But Lesher is absolutely correct. That is a great example. You have to understand. We'll use this example because he's going to get to it. But if you have a situation where you have 9 butcher houses that are kosher and one that's treif, you have 9 kosher, 1 treif, so you have 1 out of 10 that's treif, and you have a slab of meat that fell on the ground that has no identifying fact, probably shouldn't eat it for other reasons, but assuming that you're not going to be worried about the spoiling and all that stuff and the what's it called, food poisoning, halacha is that you could eat it. Now the question, I can't eat it all at once, right? I can't eat chabit I can't eat the 2. If I have 3 pieces of meat, 1 is treif, 2 are kosher, I can't eat them all at once. But I can eat one after the other. How can I do that? I know statistically 1 out of 3 is treif, or in this case of the butcher houses, 1 out of 10 is treif. How could I eat that? Because the rules of halacha, of rov, work differently than statistics. So let's look at a few examples. I don't know if we're going to get through the whole tshuva, I realize, but we'll try. He takes this case of the 9 chanios, tisha chanios, mochros, basar shchuta, va'achas nevela. You have 9 stores. 1 sells non-kosher meat, and 9 sell kosher meat, and 1 sells non-kosher meat. V'nimso eser chatilos basar b'neim, and you find 10 pieces of meat. Let's say I take them all together. Can I put them together? Of course I can. But one of them is going to be nevela. If I have a city which is majority Jewish and the minority is non-Jewish, let's say I even have a rov of shishim. He brings a proof from a Mishnah in Machshir, which is quoted in the Gemara Ksubis. If I have a child which is found, unidentified child which is lost, how do I know if this child is Jewish? So he says the Gemara in Ksubis Daf Tes Vav Amabez quotes a Mishnah Machshirin, and it says if I have Rov Yisrael, I assume he's Jewish. If I have Rov Akum, Rov non-Jews, I assume he's not Jewish. Now he says, does that mean that if I get a bunch of people from that city over the years, I can't make them all into a minion because maybe some of them are not Jewish? What do you mean? Statistically, he makes his point later, but he says, why don't I just figure out, what are the women of that year that gave birth in the hospital in that city, and figure that out, and figure out a population, and do a whole stuff. No, that's a simple question. Rov Yisrael of this city, is it your Rov Yisrael? What do you mean Rov Yisrael? Women who have are childbearing age. How old is this kid? Why are we just saying Rov Yisrael? So Rov Yisrael is enough halachically. That's so proof number one we said was the 9 stores that are treif, kosher and one is treif. You could cook them all together, all 10 together. Cook it all together. You could have it. You could eat it. Number 2 proof was this. Yeah. So you can't do it. So it's a good question. We'll have to get to that. I'm not sure if we'll have time to get to it. You can't do it l'chachila, but we'll have to see. His basic point is that when you look at Rov has to address a suffix. So we'll have to get to that in a moment. Put that on the side for a second, just to prove to you that Rov is not statistics. He brings 2 proofs so far. One is the 9 kosher, and 10th is not kosher. You could eat it all together. And then the tinok that was found, the baby was found in the Mishnah Machshirin. We could say Rov Yisrael, he's Jewish. Okay. That's Rov, but he's just saying Rov doesn't work the same way. We're just saying that that it doesn't work the same way. So let's see. Let's use a source here. I'm just gonna have to skip. Look at the Venire Raya Ledvarenu. Sorry. Chol Yisrael has the same problem there. This is the same problem for any type of milk product. Venire Raya Ledvarenu. The case of the Shulchan Aruch in Pei Aleph Sif Beis is you have milk or cheese that is coming from a herd, and that herd has 60 animals there. Now, if I know, he says, if I know that the animal is treif before I milk it, then for sure I can't eat it. But let's say I have 60 animals in there, but I don't know if any of those animals are treif. What's the halacha there? So the Ramah writes, if I don't know, I'm allowed to say, this animal, I look at every animal individually. Is this animal treif? No. I can say Rov behemoths ksheros. Next animal, no. Next animal, I can go through all 60 in this herd. If I don't know there's a treif animal, I can assume there's 60. Harelan lahedja the taruvis chalav shel harbe behemoths korav l'shishim mutter b'shtia. I could drink the milk even though I don't know for a fact that there is no treifus there, but I can assume that I have korav l'shishim, I have 60. And then he says the shach quotes a shach, and the shach says similarly that this idea that I can rely on what's called a suffix shishim, I can rely on an assumed 60 times 1. Even though in this case I'm going to mix all this together, I'm allowed to rely on suffix shishim. The shach says this is the Rabbanan, but I can rely on shishim. So Rav Shuai says, since they all have an assumption that they're kosher, okay, let's skip that for a second. So basically, since I have an assumption that every animal is going to be b'cheses kashrus, I can assume that every single one of these 60 animals are not treif. Okay. I'm just wondering if I have time to do this proof. Okay.
What's the proof from the Gemara? Is that the end that you're saying?
Well, I was just going to do another one. No, the point is that if I have a suffix, it's not that I know. If I know for a fact that one of the animals is treif, then I have a problem. But if I don't know, I don't know for sure. I know that there's a possibility of treifus, but I don't know for sure that I don't have shishim. I can rely on the shishim misafik. So, and how do I rely on the shishim misafik? Rav Shuai says because every behema has a chesros kashrus, and each behema is determined individually. Okay. Now he brings another proof to this idea from the Gemara in Zvachim. Because there's another problem. There's something called kol deruba meruba parish. That's basically what he's saying. He's saying, since I'm taking something out of a majority, I can say, well, I'm assuming this comes from the majority. Kol deruba meruba parish. And the Gemara in Zvachim has a problem with this and says, well, sometimes if I consider something to be kavua, it's a little bit complicated, but I'm just going to run through it for a moment. If it's kavua, if it's stationary, then we have to treat it kemechza al mechta. We have to treat it as 50-50. So the Gemara in Zvachim has cases where you have a bunch of karbanos and they're mixed together with other animals that are not able to be eaten, ashor niskal, other things. And the Gemara says, well, if I have this mixture there, and the Gemara says you have to let it graze until it gets a mum, or other things, or kill it, why can't I just take the animal and separate from the herd and say, kol deruba meruba parish? I assume that it's going to be coming from the rove. So the Gemara says you can't do that because maybe we would assume it to be kavua, and kavua is kemechza al mechzadam. Kavua, it doesn't have the same principle as kol de parish. And the Gemara says, well, in midrabanan we don't do it because we have a concern maybe it can be considered kavua. So Rav Asher Weiss brings a proof from the way that Rashi learns this Gemara in Zvachim, which I don't know if I have time to do the back and forth here so much, but basically Rav Asher Weiss says, in the Havamim in the Gemara, we were ready to say, without the concern of kol kavua kemech tzamech, so we were ready to say, bring the animal separated from the herd, and then don the animal, judge the animal individually. And we don't say, well, he says there could be a different problem. If later on you were to discover some problem, then we're going to say retroactively. He says the bull that had the blood in it for the sacrifice is all usher. No, once you paskin the shiloh of rove, you don't go back retroactively. I can't get into all the details now, I don't have enough time, but that's his proof from the Gemara in Zvachim. So basically, Rav Asher Weiss is saying statistics are not halacha. Now, what Rav Shechter would counter is this is all very good and well, but at the end of the day, at some point, you have to take off your halacha glasses and put on actual glasses and say, look at the reality. Look at what's happening. Look at the facts on the ground. And that's really where it breaks down. Rav Asher Weiss, Rabbi Chaim Jachter has a short article where he summarizes this, and he says Rav Asher Weiss argues that halacha and statistics do work differently, but Rav Shechter is much more in the school of thought that halacha and statistics and science have to work together. And this is, he connects it, I don't think Rav Asher Weiss connects it, but he connects it to Rav Shechter's shita on tchelas, where he says, we can use modern scientific methods to determine what the halacha should be. Rav Asher Weiss is well known as an opponent of tchelas, and he says because you're looking at modern archaeological discoveries and you're saying, I know I'm jumping to a whole different topic, but I'm just to like show you how this is a real fundamental question. You're using these scientific methodologies and you're applying it to halacha. You don't understand how halacha works. But Rav Shechter is saying, yes, that's how rove is when you don't know. But if you do know, at some point, if it's 90% of something, you can't just say, well, every cow is gonna be a suffix, and we look at it as a rove, and rove is passing the shiloh. Rav Shechter is saying at some point that has to break down.
Doesn't it break down when it's not rove?
You don't know if you don't have rove. You need shishim, by the way. You need shishim, but if you don't know you have a treif animal. Nobody knows I have a treif animal. All we know is, writ large.
Even without the
well, if I knew that there was a non-kosher animal in there, like a pig or a camel, then I have to say I can no longer just close my eyes and say I have shishi.
But if it's all cows, there's never a case where you know. You have to shecht it.
Well, that's what Rav Asher Weiss is saying. Yes, you would never know unless you know. Rav Asher Weiss is saying we don't have a vadai treif. We have a suffix, and each animal could be assumed to be a treif, a kosher animal until proven treif.
And even if after you check the 3-year-old disease Shabbat and find them all traits, you still go based on
also, you don't know when the abrasion happened. You don't know at what point it happened. That's another snif lahaka. But again, we don't. That it's a basic fundamental question as to how we use statistics. I'll just read to you.
Basically, you close your eyes and you say, well, go to based on the road, but then...
But it's not closing your eyes. It's just Rav Asher Weiss is saying that. Do you know? This is how we learn halacha. Halacha and bittul doesn't work the same way as statistics. The same. He proved it from a number of different gemaras and the way the Ramah treats suffix shishim. You have a suffix shishim. You don't know vada. You have treif. We have a reyes, so we have a question. There's maybe a treif animal in this herd. We don't know. He says you can rely on suffix shishim. I just want to quote from this Rabbi Jachter article. Quotes from this leading physicist, Rabbi Dr. Jeremy England. He says the following: Torah and physics. I guess he's a rabbi doctor, so he has a little more exposure to both disciplines. Torah and physics have their own language. It must be understood on its own terms, without unnecessary reconciliation. Statistic, probability, and rov are both correct, but cannot be mixed. Then he quotes from Rav Soloveitchik, who in a celebrated address at a rabbinic alumni in November of 1975 wrote as follows: Can you psychologize mathematics? I will ask you a question about mathematics. Let us take the Euclidean geometry. Euclidean. Shows you my ignorance, sorry. Euclidean geometry. I cannot give many psychological reasons why Euclid? I'm saying, how do you say the name? Euclid said two parallels do not cross. Or, meaning, can I give you a psychological reason why he said that? Or why the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. If I were a psychologist, I could not interpret it in psychological terms. And when it comes to Torah, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, all the instruments of psychology and history, utilitarian morality, are all used to determine the very authority of halacha. To say that the halacha is not sensitive to problems, not responsive to the needs of people, is an outright falsehood. The halacha is responsive to the needs of both the community and the individual. But the halacha has its own orbit, moves at its own certain definite speed, and has its own pattern of responding to a challenge, its own criteria and principles. In other words, we have to understand halacha, we have to understand mathematics, and sometimes you have a machlokes in the poskim as to how much credence or weight do we give to one over the other. And it's not that one's false and one's true, and it's not that one's true or one's false. It's that they work differently, and they may have a different language. According to Rav Asher Weiss, you're making a mistake when you assume that there's a majority of statistical probability, and that equals rov. It doesn't mean the same thing, and therefore it's not correct to say that we have a statistical more probability of treifas in the milk, and therefore you can't drink it. It's just you're misunderstanding how halakha how it works. I know some people had some questions earlier. I didn't get to every line in it, but that's the basic gist of it. I think Rav Zalman Nechemia Goldberg, Rav Levi Yitzchak Halpern. Sorry, I think I said Rav Levi Yitzchak Halpern, Rav Asher Weiss, Rav Belsky, Rav Zalman Nechemia Goldberg. They may have other roots. I know some people quote this svara that we don't know when the sirchos happened. Rav Zalman Nechemia Goldberg says each cow has a chesus kashrus. I didn't research every single posting. I looked at this tshuva, but Rabbi Gil Student has an article that he summarized these other rabbis' shitos in 2006. Seems like this whole thing kind of went crazy like 25 years ago. So we're a little bit behind the times. But Rav Schachter keeps saying we have to do a study. So the reason why he says that is because he looks at, and this is why he holds again tcheles, and he's much more open to using scientific methodology to determine halacha, and that's why a lot of people say tcheles. We're not going to use archaeological digs to, even if it looks like it could be, but halacha functions differently. Yes. Yeah, unless you know you don't have shishim, right? That was the Ramah. If suffix shishim, the Ramah says in Pei Aleph Beis, you can rely on shishim. Which goes back to I think Miriam's question, which was, well, Is this lechatchila or b'diavad? So, yes. Because when it comes to, we're not going to go and take 10 butcher shops, 9 are kosher and 1 is treif, and then, lechatchila go and mix them together. But here, the scenario is that they're mixing all of the milk together and they're pasteurizing it all together. Is that b'diavad? I don't know. It's just that is what the methodology is now.
It's a big machlokas in the Rishonim, right?
Which thing? Bitul Isha L'Chachila?
No.
We don't do bitter. Yeah.
No. I'm talking about if you have, let's say, Slina and Basar you have 3 pieces of meat now. Can you eat them zach or zeh, or whether you can eat them all together?
Right.
It's a big difference.
We're machmir, we don't do it together.
Right.
But it's
the Rosh allows it.
Right, but the Rosh says it's okay. Halacha l'maisa, the shop says we don't eat it. We don't eat it together. But this is another question. I can leave you with this question. If you're uncomfortable with using bittul, there is a prima gadim that says you're a kofar because you don't believe in the principles of halacha. You're saying, well, I don't know, 9 out of 10 are kosher, but 1's treif, so I'm not going to eat it. So he says, you don't trust the halachic system. Another say, no, you have to, timtum aliv, we have to be careful. And so this is I don't know if this is a simple one sugya type of issue. It's a big picture question. How do we look at statistical probability in halacha? How do we look at rove and bittul? Is it just the rules of halacha work differently? It's how much do we say this is similar to it or not? It's not so clear to me. I think that it's definitely the consensus by all the kashrus organizations. You could be cynical and say, well, they all have their boards and they all want this to be kosher and they lose a lot of money. I don't know. It seems to be the consensus of poskim think that Rav Shechter, b'chvodo ba'atzmo, he's the minority and we can rely.
But the Gura says one
Specifically, in many areas.
Opening up
There's a 1 out of 3 chance.
Doesn't matter. He's good though.
Definitely.
We don't do that.
It's not 1 out of 3. No, it's not 1 out of 3. It's Butler.
Right.
Once it's Butler, I'm all Dina.
We don't go by
Now the Rush.
Okay.
That's the Rush.
Okay, I think we're gonna have a speaker now, but everyone's welcome to stay if they want. But we're gonna stop the share now just because someone's coming to speak. I think 10 minutes. I was told.
Who's this?